Psalm 57, under his wings, you find refuge, every threat is neutralized. The hidden refuge of the soul. There are moments in life when every sound outside feels threatening, when the world seems to turn against you, and the weight of fear, uncertainty, and betrayal presses down like a storm. It is in those moments, when human strength fades, that the words of Psalm 57 rise like a shelter for the heart. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. This psalm is not just a poetic prayer from the lips of David. It is a spiritual map for every believer who finds themselves hunted by invisible enemies, by despair, anxiety, rejection, and the relentless pressure of life. When David wrote these words, he was not sitting in comfort or peace. He was hiding in a cave, pursued by King Saul, who sought to destroy him. The one anointed by God was now a fugitive, surrounded by darkness and isolation. Yet, in that very darkness, he discovered a divine reality, that under God's wings, fear loses its authority. The image is tender yet powerful, a bird covering its young beneath soft feathers, shielding them from the cold, the wind, and the predator's gaze. In this symbol, David saw the truth of God's nature, not distant, but deeply protective, not passive, but actively surrounding the faithful with unseen strength. The secret of Psalm 57 is that divine refuge is not a place you run to. It is a state you awaken to. It is the realization that God's presence is not far away. It is over you, around you, within you. Every threat, no matter how loud, becomes silent in the presence of his covering. David's faith was not based on the absence of danger, but on the certainty of divine nearness. And that is where this psalm becomes a revelation for every soul seeking peace in the chaos. Refuge is not found by escaping the storm, but by resting beneath the wings of the one who commands it. The wings of God are symbolic. They represent mercy, protection, intimacy, and divine favor. When the psalmist declares, "Under his wings you will find refuge," it is not a poetic exaggeration. It is a spiritual law. In ancient times, the wings of the cherubim covered the Ark of the Covenant, the very throne of God's presence. To be under his wings meant to dwell in the shadow of the Holy of Holies, the place where the infinite touched the finite, where heaven kissed the earth. It was the realm where no harm could penetrate, no curse could linger, no enemy could prevail. To take refuge under his wings is to align your soul with that sacred space, to live in awareness that the Almighty guards your path, even when the night is long. Every threat, visible or invisible, loses its dominion because divine authority supersedes human aggression. The heart that hides in God cannot be conquered by fear. It learns to rest even while surrounded by danger. It learns that faith is not blind optimism, but confident stillness in the presence of the storm. The imagery of wings invites us to see God not as a distant judge, but as a loving protector. The same wings that shield also lift. They are wings of flight, wings of strength, wings that carry you when your own feet can no longer move forward. They remind us that divine refuge is not only about defense, but also transformation. When you rest beneath those wings long enough, you begin to become what you behold. Your fear turns into faith, your trembling becomes trust, and your despair transforms into praise. This is why David's psalm begins with fear, but ends with worship. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. The moment he enters the shadow of those wings, his focus shifts from what threatens him to the one who shelters him. Every threat is neutralized, not because it disappears, but because it no longer defines him. The cave becomes a cathedral, the fear becomes a song, and the hunted becomes the one who sings of victory. In your life, the same principle stands true. You may be surrounded by challenges, betrayed by people you trusted, or haunted by memories that whisper defeat. But under his wings, your soul finds immunity from destruction. God does not promise the absence of storms. He promises the presence of shelter. The wings of the Almighty are not symbolic comfort, they are spiritual reality. When you step into that awareness, when you choose to rest instead of resist, you begin to witness how divine power neutralizes every weapon formed against you. To live under his wings means to surrender the illusion of control. It is to release the desperate need to fix, fight, or flee, and instead learn to dwell. To dwell means to remain, to abide, to root yourself in faith so deep that even the winds of fear cannot uproot you. When David chose to hide in the cave, he wasn't hiding from Saul, he was hiding in God. His true refuge wasn't stone walls, but the unseen presence that surrounded him. In that hiddenness, he discovered the eternal truth. When you are covered by divine wings, you are untouchable by destruction. The invitation of Psalm 57 is simple yet profound. Stop running and start resting. Stop fearing and start dwelling. Because every threat that rises against you is already known by God, and every plot formed in darkness is already neutralized by his light. The wings that cover you are eternal. They are not weakened by time, distance, or circumstance. They have carried generations of believers through storms fiercer than yours, and they will carry you too. When you walk in this revelation, peace becomes your natural state. You begin to live from a posture of security, not striving. You begin to speak with calm authority because you know who covers you, and no matter what rises against you, sickness, betrayal, failure, or fear, you will declare as David did, "My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast, for under his wings every threat, every curse, every anxiety is rendered powerless." If this message has spoken to your spirit, remember to subscribe to the channel, because every week we share words that strengthen your faith and guide your walk with God. Stay with us and keep growing under the wings of the Almighty. The battle within, when the flesh fights the shelter. There is a paradox hidden within every believer. While the soul longs to rest under God's wings, the flesh resists it. The human heart is divided between faith and fear, between trust and control, between the call to dwell and the impulse to escape. The very nature of refuge requires surrender, but the flesh seeks control. The psalmist understood this conflict intimately. David knew that even when the enemy was outside, the true war was inside, the war between the desire to trust and the temptation to panic. That is why Psalm 57 carries not only the voice of confidence, but also the cry of a heart still wrestling with its own humanity. When you read the words, "I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed," you hear both resolution and waiting. The refuge is not immediate escape. It is patient endurance, and that patience is not easy. It demands the death of the ego, the laying down of self-defense, self-explanation, and self-reliance. It means choosing to stay hidden when the world tells you to fight. It means trusting in the silence of God when everything in you wants to demand answers. The flesh does not easily yield to that kind of peace. It wants to move, react, shout, and strike back. But spiritual maturity begins when you realize that true refuge is not about outer reaction. It is about inner alignment. The moment you decide to rest under his wings, your external circumstances may not change instantly. The enemies may still circle, the voices may still accuse, the shadows may still stretch across your path. But what changes is your posture. The heart that was once restless becomes still, not because the danger is gone, but because the presence of God becomes more real than the threat itself. The flesh screams for proof. The spirit whispers for faith. And the one who chooses faith begins to experience a peace that cannot be explained, a peace that transforms caves into sanctuaries and sorrow into worship. In every generation, this inner battle repeats itself. You may not be hiding in a literal cave as David was, but you might be trapped in invisible ones, caves of fear, shame, uncertainty, or loneliness. You might be surrounded by people who misunderstand your calling, misinterpret your silence, or misjudge your heart. You might have tried to defend yourself, to prove your worth, to force doors open that God has temporarily closed. And yet, none of that brings peace, because peace is not found in the approval of others or in control of circumstances. It is found only in that sacred stillness beneath his wings, that place where surrender becomes strength. Every believer must face the tension between panic and peace. The flesh tells you that to survive, you must act, to push, to prove, to fight. But the Spirit says, "Be still and know that I am God." That stillness is not passive, it is power under control. It is faith, refusing to be manipulated by fear. It is the choice to let God defend what you cannot. It is the awareness that your silence in obedience carries more authority than your noise in panic. David's greatest victories did not come from his sword. They came from his restraint. He could have killed Saul in that cave, but he didn't, because he understood that the one who hides under God's wings cannot act according to the impulses of the flesh. He must wait for divine timing. Waiting is perhaps the hardest form of warfare. To wait while others act, to stay silent while others speak, to remain gentle while others accuse. That is the proof of refuge. It reveals that your heart no longer depends on human vindication. You are no longer enslaved to outcomes. You begin to live from the invisible realm, trusting that what is hidden under his wings will one day be revealed in glory. The flesh wants instant justice. The Spirit trusts in eternal wisdom. And this tension, this daily choice between trusting and reacting, is the crucible where spiritual maturity is forged. David's psalm mirrors that process. He begins with fear. "Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me." It is the cry of desperation, but as the verses unfold, his language shifts. "My heart is steadfast, O God." Somewhere between the fear and the faith, something happens. Not in the cave, not outside, but inside. His heart aligns with divine sovereignty. The danger did not disappear, but its power over him did. That is the transformation that occurs under the wings of God. External threats remain, but their control dissolves. You begin to see that the battle is no longer about surviving circumstances, but about silencing the voices within that doubt his covering. The modern believer faces the same temptation. When anxiety rises, we look for escape rather than embrace. We want solutions instead of surrender. We want to see the end of the storm rather than learn its language. But what if every threat was allowed not to destroy you, but to deepen you? What if the storm is not proof of God's absence, but evidence of his training? What if every arrow that flew toward you was meant to teach you how to dwell deeper in his shadow? This is the wisdom hidden in Psalm 57, that refuge is not a reaction. It is a revelation. You are not meant to hide from life, but to hide in God, and that hiding transforms you. The cave becomes the place where the false self dies. The pride that sought to control, the fear that sought to predict, the anger that sought revenge, all of it begins to fade in the light of his mercy. When you choose to stay under his wings, you allow his Spirit to rewrite the language of your heart. You stop saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and start saying, "What are you forming in me through this?" You stop seeing the enemy as your problem and start seeing your reaction as the test, because true refuge does not only protect, it purifies. It doesn't just defend, it defines who you are becoming. David's transformation in that cave is not a historical detail, it is a pattern. Every believer must enter a cave season where God hides them to heal them. The hiding feels like rejection, but it is preservation. The isolation feels like punishment, but it is protection. The delay feels like denial, but it is divine preparation. Under his wings, the pace of life slows down, and you begin to hear what you couldn't hear before, the whisper of the Spirit reminding you that the same God who allowed the storm is the one who limits it. The wings that cover you are not fragile. They are the very boundaries of divine mercy. No threat can pass them unless God allows it. And if he allows it, it must serve a purpose greater than your understanding. This understanding changes the way you live. You begin to respond to threats differently. Instead of panic, you breathe. Instead of retaliation, you pray. Instead of explaining yourself, you trust the one who knows your truth. You realize that being under his wings doesn't mean you will be understood. It means you will be sustained. You may lose people, but you will not lose peace. You may lose opportunities, but you will not lose your purpose. Because the wings of God do not fail. They are eternal symbols of his covenant with those who love him. The longer you remain in that shelter, the more you change. Fear begins to lose its vocabulary. Anxiety starts to sound foreign. The noise of the world fades into background silence. You begin to dwell in an atmosphere that is not determined by circumstances, but by communion. You learn that peace is not the absence of warfare, but the presence of divine awareness. You learn that every external battle is an invitation to deepen your inner trust. You start to see that the threats outside are simply mirrors of what must die within: pride, control, self-reliance. The wings are not only protection, they are purification chambers where the self is refined and the soul is renewed. There is also a holy stillness that comes when you trust those wings. The psalm says, "I will take refuge until the disaster has passed." That word "until" is important. It implies waiting, endurance, faith through time. The believer who learns to dwell under the wings must learn to endure in the unseen. You may not know how long the storm will last, but you know where to stay while it does. You know that as long as you remain under those wings, nothing can touch you that is not divinely permitted. The timing is not yours to control, but the trust is yours to choose. And that choice becomes your strength. Every moment you stay hidden, every breath you take in faith, becomes an act of resistance against the kingdom of fear. Even Jesus echoed this imagery when he lamented over Jerusalem, saying, "How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." The invitation was always there. The wings were open, but the people resisted the refuge. This is the tragedy of human nature. The shelter is offered, but the flesh refuses to yield. Yet to those who do, to those who humble themselves enough to hide, there is a power greater than any defense strategy. There is rest that no chaos can interrupt. There is confidence that no accusation can destroy. That is what it means when we say every threat is neutralized. It is not that life becomes free of danger. It is that danger loses its authority. The threat no longer dictates your peace. You stop reacting to people's words, to circumstances, to delays, because you are no longer rooted in them. You are rooted in the eternal. You live from the inside out. And when you do, the enemy's strategy fails, not because he stops attacking, but because his attacks no longer move you. The wings become your secret armor, unseen but invincible. This is where true faith matures. It's easy to trust God when the sun is shining. It's harder when the cave is dark and the enemy's footsteps echo outside. But that is where the deepest worship is born. Worship that is not dependent on deliverance, but on devotion. Worship that says, "My heart is steadfast, even when tears fall." Worship that declares, "Be exalted, O God, even when hiding feels endless." This kind of faith shakes the kingdom of darkness because it reveals a soul that cannot be manipulated by fear. It is the faith that sees beyond the visible, that recognizes that the wings are not just symbols of safety, but instruments of transformation. If you are in that place now, if you feel the weight of threats, of betrayal, of delay, remember David's cave. Remember that the darkness you feel is not absence, it is shadow. And shadow only exists where there is light. You are closer to his wings than you think. You may not see them, but they are there, covering, shielding, sustaining. God's protection is not measured by what you can observe, but by what never reaches you. You have no idea how many attacks have been neutralized before they even approached your life. You see the few that pass through, but countless others were stopped by the unseen wings stretched above you. So do not despise your hiding. Do not curse the stillness. The same cave that feels like confinement is the womb of your next season. The same shadow that feels like delay is the covering of divine strategy. God hides you not to punish you, but to prepare you. He covers you because what is precious must be protected. The wings of the Almighty do not simply guard the weak, they incubate the strong. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. When the time comes, those same wings that covered you will lift you. The season of refuge will become a season of revelation. You will rise, not as the fearful fugitive you once were, but as one who has learned that safety is not found in control, but in surrender. You will walk with quiet authority, not because the threats have vanished, but because you have seen them for what they are, powerless in the presence of God. That is the secret power of Psalm 57. It teaches the believer that under his wings, life is not lived by reaction, but by revelation. You become unshakable because your trust has roots in eternity. Every time you feel surrounded, remember, David felt the same. Every time you think you are forgotten, remember, the cave was not the end. It was the preparation for the crown. Every time the noise of life grows loud, return to the wings. Rest there, breathe there, hide there. Because the wings of God are not metaphors, they are spiritual realities. They are the invisible covering that separates the chosen from the chaos. And once you learn to live there, no threat, not even death, can rule your peace. If this message has touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Every word shared here is designed to draw you closer to divine truth and strengthen your faith in the midst of life's storms. Stay connected, keep listening, and remember, under his wings, every threat is neutralized before it reaches you. The wings that heal. Renewal after the storm. There comes a sacred moment after every storm when silence returns. The thunder fades, the winds slow down, and what remains is the fragile stillness of the soul, trembling, tired, but alive. For those who have taken refuge under God's wings, this silence is not emptiness. It is the sound of restoration. It is the divine pause where healing begins. Psalm 57 was not only written from a place of hiding, it was written from a place of renewal. David did not remain a man of fear forever. The same wings that shielded him in the storm later lifted him into victory. This is the hidden rhythm of divine protection. First the covering, then the healing, then the rising. The wings of God do not merely shelter. They restore the soul to its original design. When a person has walked through the intensity of battle, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, something inside becomes weary beyond words. The body can recover quickly, but the spirit takes longer. That is why divine refuge is not a temporary escape, but a place of renewal. Under his wings, you do not only survive, you are made new. Every wound begins to close, every lie begins to lose power, and every fear begins to dissolve in the warmth of his presence. It is in that sacred stillness that God begins to whisper identity back into the heart that has been battered by life. He reminds you of who you are, not defined by the cave, not defined by the threat, not defined by the betrayal, but defined by the anointing that still rests upon your soul. When David hid in the cave, he might have felt stripped of everything, his position, his friends, his sense of direction. But in that emptiness, God began to refill him with something greater than status or strength, divine perspective. The wings of God are not only a place of hiding, they are classrooms of revelation. While the flesh wants escape, the Spirit offers education. God teaches you things in the shadow that you could never learn in the light. The cave becomes the university of kings. It is where humility replaces pride, where dependence replaces self-will, and where worship replaces worry. When the psalmist said, "My heart is steadfast, O God," he was speaking as one who had been restored. The heart that once feared was now anchored. The soul that once trembled now sang. The restoration had begun. Restoration under the wings of God is not instant. It is a gradual awakening of the spirit. Like the slow dawn after a long night, the light returns one layer at a time. You begin to feel peace again, though the world outside has not changed. You begin to trust again, though the pain of betrayal still echoes. You begin to breathe again, not because life has become easier, but because you have remembered that you are covered. The wings that shield you from harm also carry healing within them. In ancient Hebrew thought, the corners of a garment, called kanaf, the same word for wings, were symbols of covenant, covering, and healing. That is why, when the woman with the issue of blood reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she was not merely touching fabric, she was reaching for the wings of God, the covenant promise of restoration. And the scripture says immediately, she was made whole. To dwell under God's wings is to touch that same covenant. It is to come into the place where your brokenness is no longer shameful, but sacred. God does not despise your wounds. He transforms them into testimonies. Every scar becomes a doorway for His glory to shine through. Under His wings, you are not only hidden from what seeks to destroy you, you are healed from what already has. The danger may have passed, but the trauma remains, and that is where divine restoration begins its deepest work. Healing is not the erasure of pain. It is the redemption of it. It is the realization that what once hurt you is now what humbles you, and what once broke you is now what blesses others through you. When David emerged from that cave, he did not come out bitter. He came out wiser, softer, stronger. The same man who had run for his life became the man after God's own heart. Why? Because he allowed the wings to do their full work. He did not rush the process. He waited until the disaster had passed, as the psalm says, and when he finally stepped out, his identity was no longer tied to the approval of men, but to the presence of God. That is what renewal does. It changes your source of validation. Before the storm, you may have drawn your sense of worth from titles, relationships, or achievements. After the storm, under His wings, you learn that none of those define you. You are defined by your abiding. Many people seek to be used by God before they are healed by Him. But heaven's order is always the opposite. Healing comes before mission. Renewal comes before release. You cannot lead others to refuge if you have not first rested there yourself. That is why God often hides His chosen ones. The hiding is not rejection, it is preparation. He allows you to be stripped of everything that distracts you from His voice, so that when you finally rise, your strength is pure, not born of ambition, but born of intimacy. This is the process David endured, and it is the process every child of God must walk through. The wings are not merely a shelter from danger. They are a furnace of purification. You enter with wounds, but you emerge with wings of your own. It is a mysterious exchange. The one who hid under the wings becomes one who carries wings, not literally, but spiritually. You begin to mirror the same compassion that once covered you. You become a refuge for others. Your words begin to heal because they are spoken from the memory of being healed. Your heart becomes tender because you remember what it was like to be trembling in the dark. The greatest leaders in the kingdom of God are not those who boast of strength, but those who have learned the humility of hiding. They know what it means to be sustained by grace, and because of that, they carry grace for others. The shelter transforms into a source of ministry. You become what you once needed. The process of renewal under his wings also teaches the believer how to see suffering through divine eyes. The flesh sees pain as punishment, but the spirit recognizes it as pruning. God removes what cannot survive your next season. He cuts away attachments, illusions, and false securities so that your dependence rests solely on him. This cutting feels cruel in the moment, but it is mercy in disguise. A bird cannot fly with excess weight, neither can the soul. The wings of God are both a place of comfort and correction. As you dwell there, God gently reveals the attachments you must release. The more you let go, the lighter you become, until one day you realize that the very wings that covered you are now lifting you higher than you could have climbed on your own. There is a subtle but powerful transformation that happens in the heart of the believer who truly rests in that refuge. You begin to lose interest in proving yourself. You stop fighting unnecessary battles. You no longer crave recognition because you know the one who sees you in secret. You become peaceful even when overlooked, steady even when unseen, faithful even when forgotten. That is the mark of one who has healed under divine wings. You are no longer reactive to the noise of the world, because your peace does not come from the world. It comes from the shadow of the Almighty. And that peace is contagious. It becomes a fragrance that draws others to the same shelter. When David later ascended to the throne, he ruled with wisdom that had been forged in the silence of that cave. The authority he carried did not come from a crown. It came from the cave. The humility he learned under those wings became his strength in leadership. The psalm he wrote in hiding became a testimony that still speaks to every generation of believers walking through their own storms. This is the pattern of divine renewal. What is written in pain becomes revelation for others. The very place that once felt like your end becomes the birthplace of songs that never die. In your own life, you may be emerging from a season that has left you wounded or disoriented. You may feel that your strength is gone and that your heart has lost its rhythm. But take courage. The wings that covered you still hold you. The silence after the storm is not abandonment, it is alignment. God is not punishing you, he is positioning you. He is restoring what was broken in a deeper form than before. You will not return to who you were. You will rise as who you were meant to be. Every experience of loss is an invitation to discover a new depth of his grace. Every scar is a new surface for his glory to rest upon. You are being renewed in ways unseen, and soon the evidence will appear. Restoration also comes through gratitude. When the soul begins to recognize that even the storm served a purpose, it becomes free from resentment. Gratitude opens the flow of divine energy. It turns memory into worship. It transforms "why me" into "thank you, Lord, for trusting me with this." The wings of God not only heal what was broken, but teach you to interpret life through faith instead of fear. You start to see that every delay had direction, every wound had wisdom, and every closed door had divine timing behind it. This perspective is the fruit of renewal. It is what allows you to walk through future storms without trembling, because you know the character of the one who covered you before. There is also a divine gentleness that fills the heart after true restoration. You become slower to judge, quicker to forgive. You stop seeing others as threats and start seeing them as souls in process. The one who has healed under the wings of mercy cannot withhold that same mercy from others. The tone of your life changes, your words soften, Your prayers deepen. You begin to live with an awareness that every person you meet might be standing in their own cave, waiting for their own wings. And that awareness makes you a vessel of compassion. You begin to reflect the same God who covered you. Renewal under the wings of God also restores your vision. Before the storm, you saw through the lens of ambition or fear. After the storm, you see through the lens of eternity. You realize that the things you once chased were fleeting, and that what truly matters cannot be taken from you. You understand that divine purpose is not about platforms or applause, but about presence. To live under his wings is to live constantly aware of that presence, to carry it into every room, every decision, every conversation. You begin to move differently, speak differently, love differently. The storm stripped you of illusion, and what remains is authenticity. That authenticity becomes your greatest strength because it is rooted in divine truth. The psalm closes with a note of exaltation. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. This is the final proof of restoration, praise in place of panic. When you have truly healed under his wings, worship becomes your default response to life, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is purposeful. You begin to see that even the disasters you once feared were woven into the tapestry of divine glory. You praise not to escape, but because you understand. You exalt him not because you need something, but because you have seen his faithfulness up close. That kind of praise carries authority. It silences the accuser. It breaks the lingering effects of fear. It becomes a sound that the enemy cannot stand. When you reach this place of renewal, your life becomes a living psalm, not just words on a page, but breath and truth and testimony. You begin to embody what David sang. You become the evidence that the wings of God are real, that refuge is not fantasy, that healing is possible, and those around you who are still trembling in their storms will find hope through your peace. You will no longer just talk about the shadow of the Almighty. You will carry its fragrance. You will no longer need to convince anyone of God's protection. Your calm will testify louder than your words, and this is where every journey under his wings leads, from fear to faith, from faith to rest, from rest to renewal, and from renewal to testimony. The soul that hides under the Almighty's covering does not remain hidden forever. It emerges radiant, healed, and unshakable. It walks through the same world, but no longer belongs to it. It moves through the same chaos, but remains anchored in divine peace. It has learned that life under his wings is not a season, it is a way of being. So if you find yourself in that sacred silence after the storm, do not rush it. Let the healing finish its work. Let the wings continue to cover you until your strength returns. Let gratitude replace grief. Let peace become your atmosphere. You are being renewed for a purpose you cannot yet see, and when the time is right, those same wings that hid you will lift you to new heights. The storm that once terrified you will one day serve as the proof of your transformation. You will look back and realize that not one tear was wasted, not one night forgotten, not one threat victorious. Every detail was used to build the unshakable peace you now carry. Under his wings, you do not only find safety, you find yourself. You rediscover who you were before the world wounded you. You awaken to the reality that your story was never about the storm, but about the shelter. The danger only served to reveal the depth of the covering. You will rise from the cave like David did, not merely as a survivor, but as a singer of new songs, carrying the fragrance of divine faithfulness wherever you go. If this message has touched your spirit, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Stay connected with us as we continue exploring the deep truths of God's Word and the timeless power of His protection. Each message here is designed to renew your faith and remind your heart that under His wings your healing is already unfolding. When the soul has learned to rest and heal under the wings of God, Something profound begins to awaken within it. What once was refuge now begins to transform into authority. The very presence that once sheltered you starts to empower you. You begin to realize that the wings that covered you were not meant to keep you hidden forever, but to prepare you for flight. This is the divine pattern that repeats throughout Scripture. Hiding before revealing, weakness before strength, surrender before power. Psalm 57 is not only about protection, it is about transformation. It shows that divine covering is never passive. It is an active, living process in which God shapes your heart until you become a vessel of His own authority on earth. The one who has been protected learns how to protect others. The one who has been shielded learns how to stand firm in battle. The wings that once represented safety now become symbols of spiritual dominion. David entered the cave as a fugitive, but he left it as a king in formation. While Saul pursued him with earthly authority, God was clothing him with heavenly authority. The contrast between the two men is striking. Saul had the throne, but had lost the spirit. David had the spirit, but not yet the throne. Yet in God's kingdom, the presence is greater than the position. Authority in the eyes of heaven does not come from status, but from submission. Those who learn to stay under God's wings are those who later walk in His power, because authority is born from intimacy. When you have lived in the shadow of the Almighty, you no longer speak from theory. You speak from revelation. You have seen His faithfulness in the dark, and that sight gives your words weight. That is the foundation of spiritual authority. Not charisma, not titles, not visibility, but the memory of being hidden and sustained when no one else understood. True authority is always quiet at first. It does not announce itself. It emanates. It flows from the peace that cannot be shaken. It speaks, and creation listens, not because the voice is loud, but because it is rooted in divine truth. When David finally stepped out of hiding, his confidence was not in his ability to command men, but in his awareness of who commanded him. Every moment under God's wings had taught him that the real power in life is not control, but surrender. The world defines power by domination, but heaven defines it by alignment. To be aligned with God's will is to stand in a place where even threats lose meaning. The person who walks under divine authority is not intimidated by circumstances because they understand that nothing can touch what is covered by God. There is a moment in every believer's journey when hiding gives way to rising. The cave was never meant to be a permanent dwelling, but a preparation chamber. When you emerge from it, you do so with a different spirit. You have seen enough of your own weakness to no longer trust in the flesh, and you have seen enough of God's faithfulness to trust His strength completely. That shift marks the birth of authority. Under His wings, you learn to be still. Now you learn to speak. Under His wings, you learn to trust. Now you learn to lead. Under His wings, you were shaped in silence. Now you carry a sound that transforms others. This is why the psalm that began with a cry ends with exaltation. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. David's voice had changed. The cry of fear had turned into a declaration of power. The one who hid under God's wings now called others to worship under the same glory. Spiritual authority cannot be faked because it carries the fragrance of experience. You cannot counterfeit the peace of someone who has survived the storm with God. You cannot imitate the steadiness of a heart that has truly learned to trust. That peace itself becomes a weapon. When you walk in calmness in the face of chaos, darkness trembles because it recognizes the mark of divine alignment. The wings that once covered you now seem to stretch through your very being. You no longer need to run for refuge, for the refuge lives within you. You have become a walking sanctuary, a carrier of presence. Wherever you go, the atmosphere shifts because the same shadow that once protected you follows you. That is what Scripture means when it says, He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The word abide means to remain, to continue, to carry that presence into every season. As authority grows, so does responsibility. God never gives power for self-exaltation. He gives it for service. The wings that once covered you taught you compassion. They softened the heart that had grown hard through pain. They made you gentle with those who suffer, patient with those who fear, merciful with those who fail. That tenderness is the foundation of divine authority. It is what separates the leader after God's heart from the tyrant who rules by ego. David's time in the cave stripped him of the arrogance that would have destroyed him later. Every tear he shed there prepared him to rule with empathy. The wings had not only shielded him from Saul, they had shielded him from becoming like Saul. That is one of the most sacred purposes of divine refuge. It not only saves you from enemies outside, but from corruption inside. Authority without purification becomes tyranny, but authority born in the shadow of divine wings becomes healing power. The transition from refuge to authority is subtle. It is not an event, but an awakening. One day you realize that the things that used to terrify you no longer do. The opinions that once controlled you have lost their grip. The temptations that once pulled you no longer hold appeal. That is authority, the mastery of the inner world before influence over the outer. The world craves external power, money, fame, dominance. But heaven honors those who have conquered themselves. The person who has learned to dwell in God's presence is ungoverned by fear, untouched by manipulation, unshaken by loss. Their authority is not in what they possess, but in who possesses them. They know they belong to God completely, and that belonging gives them quiet boldness in a world of noise. The psalmist wrote, "My heart is steadfast." That declaration is the hallmark of spiritual authority, stability. The heart that used to waver now stands firm. The mind that used to fear now believes. The spirit that used to retreat now advances. This is the fruit of abiding. Under his wings you learned dependence. With his wings you now carry dominion. You have seen that no threat can touch you without permission, and that knowledge changes the way you live. You stop reacting to life. You start reigning through faith. Authority is not about commanding others. It is about commanding yourself in alignment with divine truth. It is about choosing peace when panic tempts you, choosing forgiveness when revenge whispers, choosing silence when accusation rises. Every time you make such a choice, you exercise heavenly authority. You declare to the unseen realm that you are no longer ruled by the flesh, but by the Spirit. God gives his authority to those who can be trusted with it, and trust is proven in the cave. The wings of refuge are the tests of loyalty. In that hidden place, you learn to obey when no one is watching. You learn to listen when no one is speaking. You learn to wait when nothing seems to move. And in that waiting, your spirit is strengthened. Authority is forged in obscurity. The throne is only ever given to those who have first bowed in silence. When David finally took his crown, he did so with the humility of a man who had already seen what power without presence looks like. He had seen Saul fall. He had seen pride destroy the anointed. And because of that, he ruled with a reverence that kept him close to God. His authority was not self-made, it was grace-made. In your own life, the wings that once sheltered you are also preparing you for influence. Every battle you have endured, every silence you have lived through, every moment you felt forgotten, all of it has been shaping you. God's wings are not just for comfort, they are for calibration. He is aligning you with his nature so that when the time comes, you can carry his heart into the places he assigns you. That is true spiritual leadership, not to impose, but to embody, not to control, but to reflect. When the world looks at you, it should sense something of the shadow that once covered you. The peace you carry should remind others of God's presence. The patience you show should echo his mercy. The authority you walk in should never draw attention to you, but always point back to the one whose wings still hover above you. The transition from hiding to leading often brings new kinds of threats. The enemy that once attacked your peace now attacks your purpose. The storms shift form. They no longer come from external persecution, but from internal pressure. Yet the same wings that protected you then protect you now. Authority does not mean the absence of attack. It means the assurance of victory. You no longer hide because of fear. You dwell because of wisdom. You no longer flee from opposition. You walk through it knowing you are covered. The awareness of divine protection becomes instinctive. You begin to live from rest even while working, to speak from peace even while facing conflict. That calmness is the signature of someone who has been truly trained under God's hand. Authority also brings the calling to intercede. Once you have known the power of refuge, you become a defender of others. You learn to spread your spiritual wings over those who are weaker, to stand in prayer for those who cannot yet stand on their own. You begin to see pain differently. Instead of asking, "Why me?" you start asking, "Who can I help through what I've learned?" That is when your authority multiplies. The cave becomes a testimony. The storm becomes a seed. Every trial you endured becomes fuel for compassion. You become a covering, a spiritual extension of the very wings that once covered you. The greatest authority is love expressed through protection. That is the heart of God, reproduced in His children. The longer you walk in this awareness, the more you realize that every season of your life was divine training. Nothing was wasted. Every loss taught you endurance. Every delay taught you patience. Every rejection taught you intimacy. Every victory taught you humility. All of it was orchestrated by the same God who watched over David in the cave. He's doing the same with you, building quiet authority through the rhythm of refuge. The more you stay under His wings, the more heaven trusts you with weight. The authority of heaven cannot rest on those who crave recognition, but it freely flows through those who desire only His presence. That is why the psalm ends not with David's name, but with God's exaltation. True authority always gives glory back to its source. This kind of authority changes how you pray. You no longer pray from desperation, but from confidence. You stop pleading for protection and start declaring promises. You stop reacting to fear and start releasing faith. Your prayer life matures from survival to partnership. You speak as one who knows the character of God intimately. You no longer beg for refuge. You command peace, knowing that you are already covered. This is what Jesus demonstrated when He calmed the storm. He was not invoking power from a distance. He was speaking from oneness with the Father. That same peace is available to you. When you live under the wings long enough, you begin to speak with their authority. Your words carry the calm that silences chaos. In practical terms, divine authority manifests as unwavering composure. When others panic, you remain steady. When others complain, you give thanks. When others curse, you bless. That steadiness is not weakness, it is mastery. The enemy cannot manipulate someone who refuses to be moved by fear. Every time you remain calm in the face of provocation, you exercise dominion over the unseen realm. The wings have trained you. They have taught you how to respond instead of react, how to rest instead of strive, how to listen instead of shout. You become unshakable, not because life has become easy, but because you know that you dwell in the shadow of the Almighty, and that no shadow of threat can overwhelm that light. As you continue walking in this state of awareness, something deeper happens. The world begins to lose its power over you. The opinions, the systems, the pressures that once defined your worth start to fade. You begin to live from a higher atmosphere, the same realm you discovered in the cave. You realize that authority is not about conquering others, but about conquering yourself in God. The calmness you carry becomes your crown. The humility you learned becomes your throne. The love that flows through you becomes your weapon. You begin to rule in the unseen while walking among men. The wings that once shielded you now seem to propel every word, every action, every thought. You have become part of the very refuge that once saved you. This transformation is the ultimate fulfillment of Psalm 57. The psalm begins with vulnerability and ends with victory. It begins with hiding and ends with exaltation. It begins with fear and ends with authority. That is the journey of every soul that abides in God. He hides you not to make you smaller, but to prepare you for greater influence. He covers you not to limit you, but to enlarge your heart. And when the time comes, He reveals you, not as the frightened one who once hid, but as the steadfast one who has learned the secret of the wings. You may not realize it, but every time you choose peace over panic, you are walking in authority. Every time you forgive when you could retaliate, you are ruling from the Spirit. Every time you rest when the world demands reaction, you are demonstrating the victory of divine refuge. This is what it means to reign in life, not through might, but through mercy, not through control, but through communion. You have learned that no weapon formed against you can prosper, not because the world is harmless, but because the covering is perfect. The wings have neutralized every threat, both seen and unseen. You now walk in that awareness, calm, steady, unafraid. The person who has lived under God's wings becomes a living expression of Psalm 57. Their life says to the watching world, "I have been hidden, healed, and now I am here, not by my strength, but by His mercy." And that testimony carries weight, it carries power, it carries peace. It calls others into the same shelter. That is how God multiplies His covering, through the lives of those who have lived under it. So, if you find yourself now in the space between hiding and rising, do not rush it. Let the wings finish their work. Authority is not something you chase. It is something you inherit through surrender. The longer you stay close to the heart of God, the more your spirit aligns with His, until one day you find yourself speaking with His tone, loving with His patience, forgiving with His grace. That is divine authority, the reflection of heaven in human form. You were never meant to simply survive under His wings. You were meant to emerge carrying their power. The wings that once protected you are still above you, and they always will be. Their purpose now is not only to cover, but to commission. You walk beneath them, not as one who hides, but as one who carries their shadow into the world. Everywhere you go, that invisible canopy follows. It protects, empowers, and reminds you that your strength does not come from you. It comes from the one whose presence you carry. If this message has strengthened your faith, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Stay connected as we continue to explore the mysteries of divine refuge, the transformation it brings, and the unshakable authority that flows from abiding under His wings. Each word shared here is meant to remind you that you are covered, chosen, and called to rise. There comes a moment when the soul, having been hidden, healed, and strengthened, finally steps into the light again, not as the same person who once trembled, but as one transformed by the shadow of divine wings. The storm that once terrified you has now become the foundation of your peace. The threats that once surrounded you have lost their meaning, for you have learned that no weapon formed against the covered heart can prosper. You have walked through fear, through darkness, through waiting, and now you understand that refuge is not a temporary escape, but a permanent awareness. You live differently now. The wings that once hovered above you now feel as though they live within you. You have become the reflection of the shelter you once sought. And this is the final mystery of Psalm 57, that under His wings, not only are you protected, but you are transformed into an instrument of His peace. David, after emerging from the cave, did not live the same way. His confidence was no longer built on outcomes, but on the certainty of presence. He did not need to prove himself to anyone because he knew who sustained him. His heart, once restless and afraid, became steadfast and fearless. That same transformation happens in everyone who truly abides in divine refuge. There is a deep stillness that replaces striving. You stop fighting for recognition and start living for revelation. You stop chasing the approval of men and start walking in the rhythm of grace. You realize that to be under his wings is to live untouchable in spirit, even when surrounded by opposition. You are no longer defined by what happens to you, but by what happens within you. The process of transformation under divine covering always leads to revelation. When David cried out, "I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed," he was declaring something that would later echo through generations. He was proclaiming the eternal truth that the safest place in existence is not a physical shelter, but the presence of God himself. It is not distance from danger that brings peace, it is closeness to the divine. The wings symbolize that closeness, a nearness so intimate that even in the chaos of life, your soul feels untouched. That nearness changes the way you see the world. You begin to recognize that every storm is permitted for your formation. Every threat is an opportunity to witness God's faithfulness, and every delay is a design to deepen your trust. Under those wings, perception itself is redeemed. As your perspective changes, so does your purpose. You begin to realize that refuge was never meant to be only for survival, but for empowerment. The peace you received in hiding now becomes the peace you carry into a restless world. The words that once sustained you now become the words you speak to others who are still trembling. The same way David's psalm became a song of deliverance for generations, your testimony becomes a living echo of that same truth, that no matter how violent the storm, there is always a place where the soul can rest. And when you carry that peace into the world, you become part of the very ministry of God's wings. You are not only one who was covered, you have become one who covers through compassion, prayer, and presence. To live under divine refuge is to live above the noise of fear. You still hear the world's chaos, but it no longer enters you. You walk through life as one guarded by invisible light. Every step you take feels accompanied by grace. The things that once would have broken you now build you. The rejections that once wounded you now refine you. The waiting that once frustrated you now forms wisdom in you. You start to see the fingerprints of God in the very places that once felt abandoned. The cave that once looked like punishment now reveals itself as preparation. Every dark season becomes a teacher. Every silence becomes a sacred conversation. You realize that the wings were never just over you. They were within you, shaping your soul into the likeness of peace itself. The ultimate revelation of Psalm 57 is that refuge leads to revelation, and revelation leads to worship. Once the heart understands who God truly is, it cannot remain silent. That is why David's psalm ends not with a sigh of relief, but with a song of exaltation. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Notice that his situation had not changed when he wrote that line. He was still hiding, still pursued, still uncertain. Yet his heart was already rejoicing. This is the mark of one who truly dwells under divine wings, the ability to praise before deliverance, to sing in the storm, to glorify God not for what he has done, but for who he is. Worship becomes your natural language because fear has been replaced by faith. When you have been hidden by God, nothing can silence the sound of gratitude that rises from your spirit. The wings of God not only protect you from harm, they teach you to see life through eternity. You begin to understand that even the fiercest storms are temporary, but the one who shelters you is eternal. You begin to measure peace not by the calmness of circumstances, but by the steadfastness of your trust. You start to live with a quiet confidence that no matter what happens, you will be sustained. This is not denial, it is divine awareness. It is the recognition that the presence of God is your home and nothing can evict you from it. Even when life seems uncertain, your inner world remains anchored. You become unshakable because your soul has found its resting place in the Almighty. There is a sacred authority that flows from that resting place. It is not loud or dramatic. It is gentle yet unyielding. It radiates through kindness, patience, and calm strength. The person who has lived under divine wings becomes a pillar in the chaos of others. You begin to walk into situations where people are panicking, and your mere presence brings stability. You become an ambassador of peace because you have learned what peace truly is, not the absence of trouble, but the presence of God. You start to intercede for others, not out of fear, but out of love. You no longer ask God to remove the storm, but to reveal himself in it. Your prayer becomes less about escape and more about encounter. You live to see his glory, even in the midst of difficulty, and that is where divine maturity is found. When you live under God's wings long enough, the very definition of safety changes. Safety no longer means control, it means surrender. It means trusting that even if you cannot predict tomorrow, the one who covers you already stands in it. It means believing that even if you walk through fire, it cannot consume you, because your life is enclosed within divine hands. That realization sets you free from the tyranny of fear. You stop being enslaved to outcomes. You stop worrying about opinions. You stop measuring success by external markers. Your only concern becomes faithfulness, to remain where he is, to dwell beneath the wings, to trust the covering more than the circumstance. That is freedom. That is refuge turned into revelation. The world may still rage around you, threats may still arise, but once you have experienced divine shelter, you no longer see threats as destruction. You see them as opportunities for demonstration. Every threat becomes a stage for God's faithfulness to manifest again. Every attack becomes proof of his continued defense. Every night becomes a chance to see his light anew. And so, you no longer fear darkness because you know that shadow means you are still close to the wings. The presence of shadow is proof of nearness. It means you have not wandered from the covering. Even the things that once frightened you become reminders of grace. You see God's sovereignty in all things, and this awareness brings rest deeper than any worldly comfort could offer. There will always be those who doubt the reality of divine protection. The world cannot comprehend what it has never tasted, but those who have truly lived under his wings know that peace is not theoretical, it is tangible. It is the calm that rises when logic says you should panic. It is the hope that burns when circumstances offer no reason for it. It is the joy that returns again and again, no matter how many losses you endure. That peace becomes your identity. You no longer chase miracles because your very existence has become one. Every breath you take under divine shelter testifies that grace is real, that faith works, that God reigns. And that testimony, though quiet, carries eternal weight. When David wrote Psalm 57, he was not writing a poem to be admired. He was documenting an encounter. He was telling the story of a man who discovered that God's protection was not an idea, but a living presence. And every believer who walks through the storms of life is invited into that same encounter. You do not need to be a king or a prophet to dwell under those wings. You only need to be willing to surrender. The wings are open to all who seek them. The covering is wide enough for every broken heart. The shelter does not discriminate between saints and sinners. It only asks for faith. The moment you turn toward God in sincerity, those wings begin to spread over your life, unseen but unbreakable. And once you have tasted that refuge, you will never again mistake worldly comfort for true safety. There is a final transformation that occurs under God's wings. the transformation of fear into worship. Fear shrinks your world. Worship expands it. Fear focuses on what might happen. Worship focuses on who God is. Fear drains the soul. Worship fills it with light. And when you have been through enough storms, you realize that worship is not a ritual, but a weapon. It breaks the power of despair. It disarms the voices of doubt. It reminds your heart that no matter how dark the night, the wings of the Almighty still cover you. Worship is the language of those who have survived. It is the song of those who know that mercy is stronger than any threat. When you worship from that place, you are not performing, you are proclaiming, you are declaring to every unseen power that the covering still stands, that you are still hidden, still sustained, still victorious. As your journey under divine wings draws to its full understanding, you realize something profound. Refuge was never about escaping danger. It was about discovering identity. You were not just being protected from harm. You were being introduced to who you truly are. You are not a fragile being at the mercy of circumstances. You are a soul encased in divine presence. You are not a victim of the world's chaos. You are a carrier of heaven's calm. The wings of God are not just over you. They define you. You are the reflection of His mercy, the echo of His compassion, the evidence of His covenant. Every step you take now is a continuation of that truth, that the same God who covered you in the cave walks beside you in the light. In that realization, the soul finds ultimate rest. You no longer strive to find peace. You realize you are already within it. You no longer pray to be covered. You recognize you never left the covering. You no longer fear losing God's presence. You understand it was never something external. It was always within. The wings have become part of you. The peace has become your nature, and faith has become your breath. That is the destiny of every believer who abides. You began your journey running from danger, but you end it walking in dominion. You started crying for refuge, but you end singing of victory. The one who once hid under His wings now flies by His strength. You have learned that the shadow of the Almighty is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new kind of life. And now, as you stand in the light of that revelation, you can finally say, like David, "My heart is steadfast." Your peace is not dependent on what happens. Your peace is dependent on who holds you. The wings of the Almighty have not only neutralized every threat, they have neutralized fear itself. You are free. You are covered. You are home. This is where the psalm leaves us, not in the cave, but in communion. The threat has passed, the heart has healed, and the soul stands still in awe of the one who never left. Under His wings, you have learned that every battle has purpose, every silence has meaning, and every storm has an end. You have learned that refuge is not a temporary hiding place, but the eternal reality of being known, loved, and protected by God. And now you live to testify of that truth, that there is no safer place than the shadow of His presence. If this message has spoken to your spirit, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and stay with us on this journey of faith and revelation. Each word shared here is a reminder that no matter the season, the wings of the Almighty still cover you, still protect you, and still carry you. Rest beneath them, live beneath them, and let your life become the song that David once sang, a song of refuge, renewal, and unshakable peace under the wings of the eternal God.